deal with the brotherhood which we stress by the motto of the Theosophical Society, and which is considered important enough to be a part of the work of the World Congress, which we are about to close. And because not all, but many of the questions deal with brotherhood, we will not take them separately, but together. First of all, we have a question which is rather amusing. It says, universal brotherhood, including all of nature, animals, creatures, and so on. While I appreciate this, I cannot resist punishing wasps, bees, and cockroaches. So what should I do to change my attitude? This is the first question which we will deal with, and after that, with most of the questions on brotherhood as one question. We'll first ask Brother Krishna to say what he wants to about this.
I'm reminded of a question that was asked to Krishnamurti after he gave a talk at the United Nations, pointing out how division between nations leads to war and violence, and how war does not solve any problems. He was asked at the end of that lecture by someone in the audience, all this talk of non-violence is very well, but what should one do when the robber attacks you? And his answer was, "Sir, first learn to live peacefully, not for one day or 1 year, but for 20 years. Then, when the robber attacks you, you will know what to do." I take that to mean that it is important to come upon wisdom so that there is love, compassion, respect for all life, humility, honesty in our consciousness. From that source, you can then meet any situation in life and it will tell you what to do. But we want answers at the level of action. We want to know, is this the right thing to do or that is the right thing to do, without coming upon the wisdom. It will not matter very much what you do if you don't have wisdom, because without wisdom it will invariably go wrong. That is why stress is laid, in my view, in the Theosophical Society on the importance of growing in wisdom That comes from this quest for truth, trying to understand what is true and what is false, and dropping away the false, so that love, compassion, respect, and so on come naturally as byproducts of that understanding. But when they don't come naturally, and you decide to have compassion and love and so on, then all these questions crop up. So that is one level at which I want to respond to this question. The other is from our scriptures, from the Buddhist canons and from some of the Hindu scriptures. I recall that they have mentioned that it may be necessary for you to cut a branch of a tree. But before you do that, you must ask for the forgiveness of the tree for having to harm it or damage it. It is that spirit in which you are acting which is more important than whether you cut the branch or don't cut the branch. You may say, after all, you are hurting the tree. If we could just live on air and stones and wood, yes, one need not destroy any form of life, but that is not possible. Then you have to consider what creates the least damage or least harm to other forms of life. In this particular case, I would suggest to the gentleman that if you have such a feeling, you would probably consider whether you could catch hold of the wasp and put it outside the house so that it lives in freedom and doesn't endanger you or your children. But if you feel inimical towards that wasp because it is endangering you, that feeling of enmity or hatred towards that insect is born of the ego. And that ego is a much bigger problem than your decision whether to put it outside or leave it alone.
Well, there isn't a great deal left for me to add to what's already been said. I see it as a typical catch-22 situation where in attempting to create a question in such a way that there's a black or white answer is completely false and leads us into the possibility of adopting a very hypocritical situation. Not necessarily so, but the possibility of it. If you see pictures of the vast clouds of locusts that sometimes sweep across Africa and destroy all vegetation and all food and cause human beings in villages to die of starvation, you can see that it isn't a simple black and white situation. You have to look, as Professor Krishna said, you have to look at each individual situation and decide what is the correct thing to do in that situation. And it's far too easy to make rules and try and stick to them through thick and thin, and in fact deny the natural logic and natural justice of each situation. So, if, as is so rightly been said, if your child is under attack by an animal or an insect, of course you defend your child to the point of killing it, and that you shouldn't have any moral qualms about having done it. That is the situation as I see it. Thank you.
This is a rather amusing question with which we begin the session. The universal brotherhood should include all of nature, the animals, the trees, the creatures, the very earth itself. The questioner says, I appreciate this, But does he pay his reverence, if I may say so, to the earth, to the clouds, to the trees, to the insects, to the animals, etc.? If he does, then he will know the answer in any situation. If the reverence is complete, if he feels really at one with all creatures, with the very earth itself, with what appears material, but is not, it has some element of the deity in it. If he does that, then he will know. Besides this, cockroaches, wasps, bees that he mentions, there is the fact that when we eat, when we walk, whatever we are doing, we are affecting some creature or another. There may be some small creatures on the earth, and we are treading on them when we walk. So, what should we do? I think this attitude of reverence towards life will answer many questions. It is because we are lacking in that we take this question separately. Would you like to answer this or?
The next question is, did great masters in art, like Beethoven, practice brotherhood? It's so difficult, isn't it, to get, as we say, inside another person and know from what motives they are acting in any given situation that we see them in, even people who are close to us. To know the motive that lies behind people's actions would be so wonderful at times. We could probably understand why they do things so much better if we knew the motive. And to ask whether Beethoven had more of a sense of brotherhood than other people is an almost impossible question to answer. Certainly, if you take the Ninth Symphony and the Ode to Joy at the end of the Choral Symphony, the wonderful music that he presents us with there regarding the whole subject of brotherhood would suggest that he was deeply moved by Schiller's Ode to Joy and saw brotherhood as an incredibly important part of his own life, and of course of the wonderful music that he wrote, which it probably is the finest music in the whole world, which expresses the sense of the brotherhood of humankind. Thank you.
I would like to add to what Brother Colin has just said. In my view, it is important for us to distinguish between what we call greatness and goodness. There are many people who are extremely talented in some particular aspect of life, whether it be science, mathematics, sports, music, art, or something like that. We have treated them as heroes, and we look up to it because we greatly value achievement. Not that achievement is not important or valuable for mankind, but it is not the same thing as goodness. You can often find extremely talented people who are extremely egotistic, whose relationships are awful, who are very unkind to their own families or people around them, very vain. Goodness and greatness don't necessarily go together. Often, great talent contributes to great ego in the human being. They are two separate things. Talent is a gift of nature, probably genetically acquired also. And goodness is not so acquired. It is something that is required of every human being, and we need to work at it, because it's one thing to be good out of just innocence, and that innocence is extremely corruptible. If you come across bad influences and so on, the innocent man gets corrupted. But if that goodness is rooted in self-knowledge, in deep understanding of oneself, then you are incorruptible. And that is what the aim of the Theosophical Society is, in my view. Because when you come upon wisdom, only then you are incorruptible. You not only have goodness, but you also understand why that goodness is natural and necessary.
We should recollect that people who are living on this earth are not perfect, except very few who deliberately take birth on this earth. And some of them are higher up in understanding, in living, in knowing than others. There is a gradation of people. But in the great masters of art, we find that the practice of brotherhood may vary. All of us do not develop in exactly the same way. So, in some, the capacity to see beauty in certain things or in most things may develop, but other qualities may not do so in the same way. For a perfect man to come up, he must be special in beauty, in goodness, in many ways which we need not go into at the present moment. But if he develops in one way, we will hope that he will develop in other ways. You may find a great artist who does extraordinary work in some cases, but who in other ways are deficient. But they will develop that also. We do not know about Beethoven. There may have been faults in him, as in other artists. There is no perfect man in a perfect artist. So we must be aware of that. We must take inspiration from the great work they do, not from the small failings which still drag them back from time to time.
Great.
This is.
I'll read the next question. In the Key to Theosophy, HPB mentions that in the last quarter of every century, the TS gets new impulses. Kindly narrate those that the TS received during 1975 to 2000 and what their impact was on the TS. I don't feel competent to respond to it, so I'll request Radha to respond to it.
In the last quarter of every century, we are supposed to receive a new impulse. But how many of us are capable of being open to a new impulse? Or do we get carried on by the old impulses and ignore the new impulse? This is a question we have to ask ourselves. Did the TS get the new impulse? The questioner says that the TS gets new impulses, and HPB mentions that. I personally think that Krishnamurti was one of the people who gave a new impulse. Perhaps he was a person who gave a worldwide impulse. There were great teachers before him, but since the world was different, what they taught was at that time known only to a few. The Buddha spoke, and only the people who were round about him in North India realized that a great person was speaking. But now Buddhism has spread. So there have been others like that. But Krishnamurti lived at a time when his teaching was known throughout the world in his lifetime. And the Theosophical Society prepared for that. One can say the TS brought him up. It was not actually the TS, it was Dr. Besant. But apart from him, the questioner says, kindly narrate those that TS received in 75 to 2000, and what was their impact on the TS. To some extent, I think the Dalai Lama has been giving that impulse towards a different way of life. And there are a number of people who are not known throughout the world who are giving that feeling that a new way of life is necessary, where we must put aside the animal characteristics which drive us to fear, to hatred, to suspicion of others, and so on. So, Theosophy is known through certain people, and others try to understand and live according to the teachings. So, I think that it is not possible to narrate what the TS received, because each one receives what he is capable of receiving, but through the TS, something fresh was given. Perhaps it will take effect in full much later several centuries later, as it happened in the Buddha's time, we do not know. We will know from some other world, or if we are in birth as human beings at that time, we may know.
Yes, please. The spiritual forces that surround us as we go through this earth life, of course, are not specifically orientated to us through the TS. Neither are all the people who are likely to respond to those forces within the TS. And it's quite possible that if the TS fails to respond to those impulses, or just isn't even sensitive enough and orientated enough to know the impulses are even there, that those impulses will find another course of action in humankind and in human society. And I think it would be fair to ask the questioner to look a little wider than just the Adya society, to not only the whole of the theosophical movement throughout the world, but also to the whole way in which the world has evolved politically and socially. And isn't it true that in Western Europe, in particular, in the whole of Europe, we have advanced the cause of brotherhood enormously in the last 25 years in all sorts of ways? I'm quite sure that most of us feel much more comfortable with being in the European Union and so on than perhaps we did 25 years ago, 35 years ago. The whole march of evolution of human society is not confined to the energies that are directed through the TS. And I think the questioner needs to look at a much wider canvas than he's orientated this question at the moment. Thank you.
Next question. Can you give us some hints or indications on how to help others out of their ignorance in a brotherly and respectful way? What are key elements for an appropriate support of the natural process towards wisdom within each individual? Are there circumstances in which it is wiser to abstain from active support? I think if we look around ourselves seriously, and also learn from those observations about oneself, one finds that most people have ignorance in the form of illusion, but they are not aware of their own ignorance. They are not aware of their illusion. Because the moment you are aware of being in illusion, the illusion begins to dissolve. Since this is true, since one finds this true in others, it tells me that it must be also true about myself, because I am also human and I am not different from the other. And there must be ignorance in me of which I am myself not aware. Once you see that, not just intellectually, but through your own observation, you realize that you don't feel angry or upset when you witness ignorance in a fellow human being. You know that he is not able to get across his illusions for the same reason you yourself are not able to get across your illusions. He is not able to drop his habits for the same reasons you are not able to drop your habits. That's what it means, that the other man is yourself. So there is, first of all, through that realization, a great feeling of friendship, of sharing this human condition of ignorance with all others. But my blind spots are not necessarily the same as that of my friend. If both of us are aware that we have blind spots which need the light of awareness, and we are unable to throw that light, then in that sense of humility, if we meet and have a dialogue as friends, since my blind spots are not the same as his, and vice versa, we can help each other, lighten up each other's blind spots. And that, I think, is the true help that one gives to another individual. Because when you dispel the ignorance in the other human being, you have really resolved a big problem in his life and helped him to stand up on his own legs. Of course, you can also help materially or give something that solves an immediate problem, but it also often creates dependence on charity. So that's not really a big help. Much bigger help is to help a human being to stand on his own legs, not only in the sense of earning a livelihood, but in the sense of facing problems for himself in his life. And that needs wisdom. That's why the greatest help you can give is to create this inquiry, to bring about a learning mind in yourself and in your friend, because that learning mind has potential to grow to any extent in wisdom. But if one lives with conclusions and one lives with a closed mind and one thinks that one knows and one only has to spread these opinions and knowledge to others, that itself is a great cause of ignorance in oneself. So that, in my opinion, if one understands that, that is the way you can relate to the other, and that is also a brotherly way. It is also respect of the other individual, not out of a decision, but out of this fact, the observation of this fact. What are key elements for an appropriate support of the natural process towards wisdom within each individual? For any action, it has been said that there are three things which we must ask ourselves. Is what I am saying true? Is what I am saying kind? And is it helpful, constructive? You can be very truthful, but very unkind. You can go and tell an ugly-looking person that you are very ugly. It may be true, but it is extremely unkind. It is not constructive to go and tell that to another human being. So, you can keep these three elements in mind, but ultimately, the decision will come with the wisdom that you have. You can't act with the wisdom of Krishnamurti or Madame Blavatsky or Mrs. Annie Besant, because you don't have that wisdom. But what wisdom we have need not be static. We can grow in wisdom, but you grow only if you continue to learn in one's own life. Are there circumstances in which it is wiser to abstain from active support? I would say so, because when somebody is obviously doing something very grossly wrong, he may be your friend, you should not only not support him or her, but I think it is a demand on friendship to tell him or her in a friendly and advisory manner what you think and why you think it is not something he should be doing. Friendship doesn't mean support. Friendship means a free and frank sharing of life and exchange of views in which there is no fear of being misunderstood, of feeling insulted or upset, where there is trust, where there is affection, so that you feel free to say yes and you also free to say no. Otherwise, it's not really friendship, it's just some sort of a diplomatic relationship one is maintaining with the other.
Yes, I'll pass on this one. It's been expounded so well already that I don't wish to make any further comment. Thank you.
I think the whole idea of helping another is somehow unsavory. The helping of another is possible when oneself has developed to an extent that the other is helped. But so long as we have some defects, it is not possible. So, to start with, to say, how can I give some help, some hints or indications of how to help another, is itself ignorance. I think so. The great people we know did not do that. There is the story of the Buddha who was walking along. In those days, there was no other way of transport. And people said, there is a terrible assassin coming our way, so let us run away. And all the monks ran away. But the Buddha, left alone, walked calmly and slowly, and the assassin came near him and wanted to kill him. But the Buddha was not touched, alarmed. He was very calm. So the criminal wondered what was the matter, that this man had no fear, was not disturbed, and so on. And he began a conversation which ended in his beginning to feel that his way of life was wrong and he should become a disciple of the Buddha. This is a story which may or may not be true. We do not know. But it gives some idea that the person who really knows how to help does not say, I know how to help, you must do this, you must do that. That is not the way, because what is right for one person in one situation may not be so for another. So we have only to encourage that impulse. And how can we encourage another person when we ourselves lack the impulse, at least to show it at all times? So, all that we can do is to be like the Buddha, wise, kind, compassionate towards all, more compassionate towards those who do wrong than others, perhaps. And that is all. And out of that will come the right solution. The solutions differ from person to person, from context to context. So we must not take it for granted that we know because we have understood something of theosophy, and therefore we can help anybody who does wrong. We know when he goes wrong. We may not. He may be a better theosophist than we are. So let us be careful, proceed in a gentle, affectionate, understanding way, understanding even those who seem to do wrong. Are there certain circumstances in which it is wiser to abstain from active support? What do we mean by active support? Telling the other person that he is wrong, that he should change his ways, and so on? Or is something else needed? Perhaps by giving affection, by other means which we may find for ourselves, the other person will be helped.
Next question is a very short one. Can there be union between people who antagonize each other? One's immediate reaction, of course, is no. But one could look a little deeper into this question than the surface value of it. First of all, union. Union is a strange word to use, isn't it? Because union has a number of different contexts in the relationships between two individuals. Or does people mean collectively a group of people with another group of people? Let's look at it at two levels. If we want to enjoy the company of somebody else, we obviously choose someone who pleases us, who has similar interests and habits and customs, who speaks the same language. All sorts of things come into play when we choose who we fraternize with. However, we ought to look perhaps at a deeper meaning of the word union than just our normal social contacts. There is a sense, isn't there, in which the whole subject of brotherhood without distinction implies that somehow or other we need to find a formula or a technique for living or something within ourselves which enables us to look at every man and woman that we meet in life with equanimity and with love and brotherhood. And this, of course, is a tremendous challenge. Anyone who pretends it's easy hasn't tried. Just try and find how difficult it is. Anyone who's had to live next door to uncomfortable and unpleasant next-door neighbors knows how uncomfortable it is. Easy to believe that you can do it in theory, but in practice, it's a great deal more difficult. Perhaps you could almost say that it's impossible at the human level. And so I would like to suggest that this question really splits in the way that I suggested in my lecture earlier in the week, that we need to look at ourselves on a two-level basis. Whereas a person may antagonize us at the purely human level, at the spiritual level, we may be absolutely at one. And of course, the whole of the teaching throughout this week's Congress has been that at the highest spiritual level, we are one. That this brotherhood is not something that has to be generated from below, that it's something that it exists intrinsically within the whole of humankind. And so that at that level, of course, all people are able to be at a union. But at the lower level of our everyday personalities and ordinary everyday lives, of course, it's incredibly difficult. And we have such things as birds of a feather flock together. We tend to choose the whole environment in which we live our lives amongst people whom we feel at one with or are capable of feeling at one with. So it needs to be very realistic and look at the actual working out of union at the physical level and the awareness that at the deepest spiritual level we are all one. Thank you.
If we experience a feeling of antagonism, I think it is informing us that we are not free from some illusion somewhere from which that feeling of enmity or antagonism arises. And therefore it's an opportunity to learn about oneself. If I ask myself, why do I feel antagonistic towards this person? Say, because his views are not agreeable. What he is saying is nonsense. That may be one's opinion, that what the other person is saying is nonsense. But why does it produce antagonism? So I think one needs to examine that very closely, because it's the same, this feeling of antagonism towards your friend when he says something which you think is insulting or critical or you don't agree with it, is the same as what leads to larger hatreds and eventually leads to war. So you have to solve this at your interpersonal level, at our consciousness. And that is the work of learning, actual work of learning which one has to do in one's life if one really is interested in coming upon wisdom. Normally, one is only interested in solving the immediate problem. So one either avoids that person or brushes him aside and so on, just coping with that situation. Then you learn nothing out of it. But if you are inwardly directed and you ask yourself, Krishna, why did you feel antagonistic towards that man? After all, he was just expressing a certain opinion of his or doing something which he felt necessary to do. Why do I expect him to be different from what he is? And why am I not able to respect him and his right to be what he is? Why is there this demand that he must be this or that? Is it necessary that other people must suit us? That whole attitude that the circumstances must suit me, that the nature should suit me, that other people should suit me, is ultimately an egotistic demand. We have come on this earth as others have come. Neither they are meant for you, nor you are meant for them. We are fellow human beings, creatures if you like, if you want to include everything else, who are leading our lives. And its antagonism comes only when self-interest of one clashes with the self-interest of another. So I have to find out whether it's possible to approach the other without any self-interest, including wanting support or wanting agreement from the other person and so on. Then there will be no feeling of antagonism, though it doesn't mean that you will agree. You will notice that he has a very different view. You may not agree with that view. You would probably examine what he has said, whether it could be true, before you discard it. But if there is antagonism, there is somewhere in me I'm carrying a bowl, as I said in my talk. You are carrying bowls around you, and if he has not put something in your bowl, you are antagonized. So the deeper work is to find out if I can approach human beings without a bowl, without an expectation. Then where is the need for antagonism? At a bigger level, not the interpersonal, one needs to understand what I would call innocent groups and what creates groupism that brings division in society or in life. A group of people working in the post office, they are all co-workers doing the same work, they are together. They don't create a division. A group of school teachers don't create a division in society. But a religious group with a belief saying what we think this is necessary to spread, the others are infidels and so on, creates a division. And we need to also ask ourselves, as theosophists, is the Theosophical Society such a group which is creating division in the world? Are we separating ourselves, feeling we are superior to the other people because we are theosophists, we are more broad-minded, we have better ideals and so on? In that case, we are. We then become another religion, another division in society. Or are we also together not because we are a clique of people who think the same thing and want others to think the same way, but because we are interested in the same inquiry, and therefore we come together as friends and don't constitute a new division in society. So there is a lot of deeper ramifications to this which one has to observe in oneself. What are the reasons for being a member of the Theosophical Society, and whether that act itself is creating a division or not creating a division.
Can there be union between people who antagonize each other? Are there people who who are incapable of feeling antagonistic to another? Even if that person does harm, even if that person says something which is not pleasant, and so on. You know the statement about being hit on one cheek? There are many ways of responding to that. You can respond in a similar way by hitting the other person on his cheek. You can perhaps respond like a weaker person, not do anything physically to him, but feel resentful that he does that, and so on. But if he hits you on the cheek, you feel sorry for him. You feel that he should perhaps behave in a different way. You feel love for him because he behaves so foolishly that would be a different thing. So there can be different forms of relationship between people. The one who is antagonistic can be met by antagonism by another, or he can be the other can be outwardly calm, but inwardly seething with feelings against the person who hit him, or he can feel compassionate, loving, and realize that the other person is so foolish that he needs to change, but you can't do anything. So there are many ways in which one can deal with the situation, and one must think of this very carefully before an action is taken.
Try this one next. Is true brotherhood a state in which there are no values created by our culture and upbringing? For me, the concept of brotherhood is in which everyone comes to contribute their own particular gifts and insights. It's not a question of uniformity, it's a question of unity. And the two things are extremely different. The whole suggestion that we should be, ideally, if we were to follow brotherhood to its ultimate conclusion, a society of people who are all absolutely identical is crazy. It isn't like that at all. It's a situation in which everyone comes to respect the particular contribution that the next person makes to the whole. And we are only as good as the whole, not as good as the best, if there is such a thing as the best theosophist in the Theosophical Society. There's a huge, important concept here that needs to be grasped fully. As we encourage and hopefully bring more people into the society from different parts of the world with different cultures and different upbringings, we're not hoping to convert them to some uniform theosophical blueprint. We're hoping to integrate them into the society, to enrich the society, to make the society wider and deeper in its whole outlook and way of understanding its place in the world. Only as the society enriches and deepens itself can it become more able to communicate its message to people of all races and cultures. And it is this challenge, perhaps more than any other, that the society needs to address and develop, that it becomes a society which is able to speak the language, not just the verbal language, but the cultural language, the intellectual language, all the different ways in which human beings communicate with each other need to be part of the armory or the techniques of the Theosophical Society in passing this incredible message of universal brotherhood, and the even deeper message of the oneness that's derived from the unknowable one that lies at the heart of all existence, that to release people, the Masters say that their purpose was to release people from the bondage of religions which are demanding people to believe all sorts of things that are quite incredible, that to believe that there is some sort of anthropomorphic God. The whole purpose of launching Theosophy into the world was to release people from what the Masters call this nightmare. Strong language. To release people from the nightmare and to show them the truth in all its beauty and goodness. And in order to communicate this message, we need to have every single skill that's available within mankind's ways of communicating with each other in order to achieve our ends. Thank you.
I would like to add to what Brother Colin has just said. I think if we can think of ourselves as world citizens, then you see that your particular culture is just one way of looking at life or living, which you have learned. That there are other ways which people have learned elsewhere, in which they live with quite different values, and of course food and dress and so on, superficial, at both the superficial level and sometimes at the deeper level. So if I regard not just my culture as my heritage, but all the world's cultures as my heritage, because I am a world citizen, then I examine all of them and I pick up what is beautiful, what is wise from all of them, and I discard what is not wise, what is not beautiful, what is cruel or ugly, irrespective of whether it's from my culture or another culture. So that you begin to have a more global mind and not a mind that is polarized only in your culture and trying to spread what you call your culture. The moment you identify yourself with that culture, it is no longer an innocent belonging to a group. It creates division in the world. It is true that I was born in Madras and brought up in a theosophical family and taught physics and so on. These are incidental things that happened in the past. And surely that knowledge is sitting there in my mind. But if I give tremendous importance to it and that personality of this individual called Krishna and so on, that's what constitutes the ego, that's what creates division and so on. But if you look a little deeper, what does it mean to be born in Madras or in India? What is India? Some emperor came and conquered some piece of land and drew certain boundaries, and you call that as India. So all those people earlier in the time of Ashoka, the people of Burma and Ceylon and Nepal and Pakistan and Afghanistan were also my people. And now they are not my people just because somebody else has drawn a line. Is your love going to be decided by some emperor's line to be divided there? So you need to question these minds in our lines which we have accepted in our mind. We grow up, we're taught that. It's false. There is no such line. It is only administrative unit, just like your state is or your town is. Administratively. But it creates division when you become nationalistic and you say, no, we are Indians and Indians have given this to the world and that and so on, and you feel proud about your ancestors and so on. All that is a lot of psychological build-up and, in my opinion, not just nonsensical, but particularly damaging in the world. So culture can be very enriching, but culture can also be a great danger if we identify with it. Depends on us. Shall I go to the next question, or you would like to say something on this?
No.
In what ways can the TS best proceed forward in brotherhood? Brotherhood, in a real sense, is not something you can decide to practice. Our decision, we give tremendous importance to it but we should question that importance. It may be an illusion. What are the things we are able to decide about? We are able to decide what clothes to wear, which job to take up, which book to read, and so on. Can you decide to stop worrying from tomorrow? Can you decide to be happy? Can you decide to pursue beauty? Can you decide to love? So the greatest things in life don't come from your decisions. And yet we think our decisions are tremendously important. Are they? When they are only concerned with the superficial and the trivial can be obtained through decisions, how does it become so important? That therefore I say it's an illusion to think that because we decide to be brotherly, we can be brotherly. You can't decide to love, you can't decide to be brotherly. But brotherhood is a fact. That the other man is my brother is a fact. And if I don't see that fact, there are reasons why I don't see that fact. I am blocking myself from seeing the truth. And it is important to find out why I don't feel brotherly towards the other human being. Is it that I am too much caught up with my own thinking? What is enclosing me? There are causation of that. If you don't get rid of that causation, you will only become hypocritical in saying, I must be brotherly. You won't feel brotherly, but you have decided to be brotherly, so you will smile and you will hold hands and so on. And that's just a facade, a pretense. So the deeper work for a theosophist is to find out and work on himself. When he sees that there is insensitivity in himself, then I have to find out what are the causes of that insensitivity. If I get rid of the causes, the insensitivity goes. The sensitivity, the love, the compassion, the friendship will flower. So the barriers are within ourselves, and that is the work to dissolve those barriers in oneself. That is the quest for truth, which we have to go along with. Usually.
We have come to the end of our time. There are more questions, but perhaps this gives a little idea of how we can answer our own questions. I will finish with one last question. How do I know if my way of practicing brotherhood is the ego or from my authentic self, and does it matter? You see, the questioner has learnt these words: the ego, the authentic self, what is to practice brotherhood, etc. Are we practicing brotherhood? If one is still practicing, it is not brotherhood. But brotherhood, brotherliness, love, compassion, these are all feelings which cannot be put into words. If you begin to feel the same as everybody else, it doesn't matter what the other person is like. The other may be a worm, a bird, a person, a deva, a master of the wisdom. If the more we present ourselves as part of that unity, the more we practice brotherhood without saying that it is practice of brotherhood. If you are practicing brotherhood, then you are still at the level where you are not brotherly, but you are trying to be brotherly. And in trying to be brotherly, you are more continue to be unbrotherly. So let us learn to be in the right state of mind with regard to all people, all creatures, all things, irrespective of what we say. The meeting is closed. We can think about all these things. We don't have to think exactly as somebody else, whether that person has been answering the questions or not. But what we think must lead us to what is real, that is important. Thank you.
Thank you.